So a while back, I created two icons, Saint Felicitas and Saint Perpetua. They were both 3rd century martyrs. Both of them were young women. This one is Felicitas, and she was a slave. And both of them had children, young babies, when they were martyred. So that's why you'll see in here, you'll see the child in the icon. And I put the red crosses because those symbolize martyrdom. In the background here, you see this, this is the Colosseum where they were martyred. And the sword, so in the Colosseum, they had the wild animals come and tear them to bits, which is gruesome and terrible, I know. And since they weren't completely dead by that, they then take the sword and finish the deed by killing them with the sword. So, anyway, I am almost finished with this icon, as you can see, but the skin tone needs to be darker because she was a slave and she was probably from Ethiopia. So I'm going to darken that skin color. And what I've done is I've mixed up some red ochre and some burnt sienna. And then I mixed up a third one here, which is going to be the mixture of the two. And I'm going to apply it very, very delicately to the face. So for that, I'm going to use a sponge. And I'm going to just take some of the color I mixed up, which is, this is the mixture of the red ochre and the burnt umber. And then I'm going to just take, I have a spray bottle, just spray a little water in there to make it kind of more liquid. I've already washed out my sponge, made sure that I filled it with water and then emptied it again. And then I'm going to see how this goes. So now I'm blotting up a little bit of it. And you know from past icons that you've done where the areas of shadow are going to be. You know that around the edges of the face is going to be a shadow. And down here where her neck is. So now I'm going to blot this a bit with just the flat side of the sponge. Remember, you know, you can always come back and do it again. So this doesn't have to be the final pass on it all at all. But and let's see any further. I could go a little further down here. So the idea is to create just kind of a color that is pretty transparent. This is just supposed to be more like a glaze. And as I said, this is not going to be the final thing that I do. I will be, after I do this a few times, with different mixtures of colors, of course, I will go back and I will have to re-accentuate some of the details. But you can see already that it's starting to look a lot nicer and starting to look more like a woman of color. Now I can always later go back into this and sponge in more highlight as well, which I probably will do at some point. So I also need to do the little child, the Christ child. And for that, I'm going to use a brush because his face is just so small. And this is more or less a dry brush here. So I'm pretty much covering the whole thing, and I'll go back into this with some light color highlight for it. Then I can also use the brush, just looking over here and seeing that that area needed to be kind of blotted a bit. This area here could use some darker color. But I'm happy with that so far. And let's see if there's any areas I missed. Well, I could do a little bit over here. Now, all this time, I have not put any more paint in my sponge. So when you load your sponge with color, I always blot it first, like on a paper towel. You really don't want to have it saturated so that it comes out like in, you know, like blobs or whatever. You want it to be very kind of subtle. All right, so I think I'm going to have to be happy with that and let that completely dry before I try to do anything else in it. Okay, and then I think the other thing I'm going to do is, see how this background is quite dark. I'm going to lighten that a bit with some kind of pattern or texture, and I will show you that when I have the color mixed up. Okay, so I'm going to use a flat-tipped brush like this. It's called a filbert. And I'm going to take I mixed up some of this phthalo green blue. And I mixed in a little water with it. Pardon me, not water, I mean white. I mixed in a little white. And I'm going to blot it on my paper towel so that it's somewhat dry. And I'm just going to come in here and make some textural marks like this. I'm going to do it one more time. Have to blot it more, it's a bit too strong there. But you can see those brush strokes, can't you? The dry brush strokes. I like that. I wanted to break up just the flatness of that color. And I'm applying it pretty thinly, so it's not, when it dries, it's not going to be a huge color shift, but it is going to be a tonal shift. It's going to be a bit lighter and have some texture to it. So if you can take a look at that and then see what it looks like over here, you can see there's a lot more light emanating from this, and over here not so much. So my reasoning initially when I did this side over here was, you know, being a martyr is so sad and so mournful. But then I started reading more about the martyrs, and it was the joy set before them, which is what inspired them to endure the suffering that they did. So I want to have a background that reflects somewhat of that joy. It's somber and yet still beautiful, lifelike light coming from it. And St. Hildegard always said that the color green brings a sense of life to the viewer. And so I thought, that's what we're talking about, eternal life, right? So they're being martyred, but in the firm assurance of eternal life. So that's why I decided to lighten this up a bit. So when this dries, I will take a look at it and see. It's very likely I may need to do it again, because as you know, as the paint dries, it it changes color. It kind of fades a bit. But I do like these filbert brushes. I think they're lovely. And it's nice to give you like just kind of a little bit of a different, adding a little bit of texture to the background. And I'm working on this while I'm waiting for the sponged areas to dry completely before I can go into them again. If I were to try sponging right now, I could end up lifting up what I had put down. So if I am pressed for time, which I am a little bit because this is going into an exhibition, and this is a few days before Christmas, I'm filming this, and the exhibition, I have to deliver all the icons the first week in January. So I might get out the hairdryer and dry it in between layers so that I can put more layers on. But this was such an inspiring story of how, women's response to receiving faith involved so much sacrifice of their young children, of their families, of their marriages, their husband. But they put it all behind the importance of honoring and being a Christian. So that's so inspiring. Okay, so now we are going to wait some more for the rest of it to dry. I'm going to I have a little bit of the red ochre mixed up, and I'm using just a tiny bit of the burnt umber with it, like I did before, but even softer. And I'm going to add a little bit of it here. I'm using the side of my brush now to kind of spread it out. And then I'll use this to come down here and draw that line. First I need a little egg and water to kind of, it's hard to paint and talk at the same time. I'm trying to, what's the right word for this, diffuse. I don't want any sharp edges in there. And then, so if the angle of the eyes is like this, right, then the angle of the nose, let me see if I can do this, here and here, obviously it's going to need to come like this. And so you can see right in here that this is too far this way. So the way I'm going to help that out is just come in here a little bit with this color and just kind of carve that out a little bit. The rest of the nose angle is correct, but right in here it needed to be corrected. I'm going to take a little egg and water and diffuse this right here. And I'm going to let that be, well, I could darken it a little right here with the burnt umber and a tiny bit of the green that we used before. Oh, so pretty. Oh, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Okay, now I have to diffuse it, don't I? So egg and water. pull it out. Just very patiently keep pulling with the egg and water and a clean brush. And then I really do have to let this dry now. I don't know if you can see, but the angle now is going to be much better. And then I have to come down here and redefine this one here and this here, this here. I know I'm being like a bit too obvious about it, but don't forget, I'm going to take the egg and water and I'm going to pull it out. Just a little bit more here with the egg and water. So even though this really almost looked finished when we first started working on it today, it wasn't. And I have found that it's worth it to just keep going that extra mile. And you'll see when this is finished, it's going to be stunning. And when I see it up there at the exhibition, I'm going to be smiling inside because I know that I've done everything I possibly can to make this icon sing and sing God's song to the people who are going to see it. I think it's such an important lesson, this idea of martyrdom to us in our culture. And I'll speak for myself here, but you know, there's such this idea that I have to be happy all the time, I have to do what works for me, you know, all this kind of stuff. And I'm exaggerating a little bit, but really I need to respect the sacrifice of the early Christians and realize that my comfort is not God. And there may be times when God calls me to make a choice in a moment, maybe not forever, but in a moment, to not choose in favor of my comfort, but to choose in favor of what He wants me to do. So every time I work on an icon, there's usually something about that story that I feel God is using to speak to me. And I hope that He's also speaking to others, perhaps in a different way, perhaps with a different emphasis, but yet that, you know, each person is so different. And God speaks to us each in this unique way that He knows. He knows our hearts, each of us. So there may be a different message for you or the next person. And that's the beauty of having these symbolic images, that people can interpret them in the ways that God wants them to give them a fuller experience of His presence and His message to them. Okay, you can see that it's very hard for me to stop painting, but I must. So I think it's a lot stronger of an image right now, much more beautiful. And I can see that I'm going to work on this background just one more time, but it's very close to looking absolutely beautiful. I like it a lot. And see how the brush strokes in here? It's just kind of a little texture, but it makes it feel very alive. So, okay, let's let this dry. So now I really need to finish this one up because I have that exhibition coming up and I have to have it ready to go in a week. So, again, it almost looks completely finished, but I can see how under this eye the shadow is fairly large. I would like to increase the shadow under here just a little bit. And I'd like to increase the contrast here, make this a little darker. I'd like to work on the lips a little bit. And I think I would also like to make these crosses here a little tiny bit brighter. I'm happy with the background. Remember, we just did that it's got some nice texture to it. I'm kind of happy with the Christ child. Pardon me, he's not the Christ child. He's the child that she had to abandoned. Well, she gave it to her family to bring up, but that's when she was martyred. She had to give away her newborn baby. Anyway, it's a very sad story, but you know, the joy set before her was to be in union with Christ, and so we give thanks to God for all of his martyrs and the power of their testimony. So I'm going to I have the colors I'm giving myself to work with today: yellow ochre, burnt umber, red ochre, cadmium red light, white, and chromium green light. Wait a minute. Chromium oxide green. That was the word I was missing. So I'm going to start with taking one of these brushes here, which is a filbert. See, make sure you can see it. There you go. And it's a little bit of a rounded square tip, which is good for blending. So I'm going to take the mixture of a little bit of red ochre and a little bit of the burnt umber. And that's pretty dark, very dark. So I'm going to try this with a more dry brush. So to get the brush dry, I tapped off the excess paint. So there's just a little bit of paint left on the brush. Whatever I do to one eye, I tend to go over and do to the other eye as well. So you can see, because it's a dry brush, I have a lot more control here. And then I'm going to take some of the egg and water, and I'm going to work with the dry brush on that too, and just come in here and just kind of have it blend a little bit more. I can't really talk very well while I'm painting, but I've just been putting a little bit of that paint around and then just using the egg and water to draw it out. I need to come over here and draw this out just a little bit. So I don't think I'm going to do too much more to it. And that, I have to now wait till that dries and then see if it needs anything else. But over here, this edge here should be, see how this is all one value right here? From here to here is all one value. I want to make it a little darker over here. So I'm going to take some of the egg and water and just put it here. And then I'm going to take some of that color that I've mixed up, which is the combination of red ochre and the burnt umber. And I'm going to drop it in here very carefully so I don't, obviously when you're this close to being done, you don't want to ruin what you've got. So you want to be very careful. So I think that's pretty much doing what I wanted it to do. Now I have to come in here and take some egg and water and diffuse this edge. Oh, I think that's really nice. And you won't see me do this, but tomorrow, when all of this is dry, I will put a very light float on over the whole thing. I could come down here and do this part here just a little bit darker. And again, diffusing the edges with the egg and water. Okay, I'm happy with that. So, what I had thought was, I wasn't so happy with this mouth. I mean, I am happy with it to some degree, but I don't know if you can see it. But it needs a little bit more nuance to it. So I'm going to take a tiny bit of the oxide green with the burnt umber and a tiny drop of the cadmium red light. I'm just gonna, oops, don't want to put my hand in that. Come in here and just give it a little bit more color. I'm pretty happy with that. I'll probably come up here and do a little bit more here. Tiny bit there. I think, oops, put my hand in there again. Gonna let that dry. And just going to work on these crosses for a minute. As I'm painting this, Christmas is next week. I know everyone who's watching this gets into the kind of Christmas panic, which is definitely going on here, particularly for me because of the icon exhibition I have to deliver. I think it's like 40 some odd icons. By January 3rd. Yep. And this is one of them. Ha ha. That gives you an idea of a little bit of a panic situation, but I know it's going to be ready in time. It's definitely going to be ready in time. And then I'll come up to the top here and do this one. But you know what? I'm going to turn this around so I don't put my hand in all those wet areas that are down there. And I'll start with this one down here, make my way down. I just felt like giving a bit more life to these crosses of the martyrs that to highlight them and bring a sense of light to them by brightening the color. I really do like that. I think it gives a sense of the you know, the simultaneous sadness and joy that is part of that martyr experience. Obviously, these ladies, Felicitas and Perpetua, gave up a lot to be followers of Christ. But they have the joy of being united with him immediately in heaven. There we go. All right, so I think I'm going to be happy with that. I'm going to let that all dry. And then when it's all dry, I'll put a very pale float on all the flesh. And when that's all dry, I'll put a light coat of varnish on it. Maybe I'll just put a tiny drop more here. No. I mean, yes, but no, because it's wet and it doesn't want to be messed around with. So, leave it. Okay, let it go. All right, great.